how do you analyze your connections after building it on Revit? So I believe this has two sides that we can understand it. One is, do you use these for structural purposes, like structural analysis purposes, these connections? And the other side is, how do you analyze like QA if they are right and you didn't miss any of the connections and it's inserted wrong, so you ship or you prefabricate the wrong items?
Yeah. So as far as structural analysis, we're not typically engaged on the project in the structural analysis phase. We typically get engaged to build the fabrication model when the structural engineer has mostly figured out what the connections look like. They don't necessarily need to give us the size of the individual plates, but if we have a sketch of what the connection is going to look like and how many fasteners are in it, we'll set up the connection parametrically. And then as the structural engineer gets a better idea of the size of this connection, we'll just change those parameters to change the dimensionality of the connection. When we do engage with structural engineers to come up with connection design, we actually use tools like Dynamo. So we'll use computational and generative design to iterate through different connection design options. And so rather than analyzing what we've modeled, we're creating a model out of our analysis, right? We'll run a structural analysis and then the computer will automatically just model a structural connection for us. But then again, it's at a very low level of detail. It's basically just a sketch. And so we have to take that and turn it into something more parametric that's responding to the different parameters of the project. As far as QA/QC, it's all in documentation, right? Like I know a lot of BIM managers and modelers don't like to document their work on paper. But one of the reasons I really like Revit and I like using Revit is because it's very simple to create documentation as you go along the process. So a lot of the documentation I create never even gets to the client. It's mostly just for my own team to make sure that we've got everything correct. Because if you can see a dimension on a view of a project, it's correct, right? If you just have a parameter in a field somewhere, it's kind of hard to know if it's actually correct or not. And so very very early on in the project, we'll just start documenting things, creating detailed views and section views. Sometimes we use those to communicate with the client. A lot of times we just use it to make sure that we're doing everything correctly. The other really important aspect is making sure that you're managing your family types and instances correctly. So making sure that you don't have rogue.
Very, very important.
Yeah, very important. So we'll actually start a project and we have a very specific naming nomenclature where the connections are associated with a particular column. And so what we'll do is we'll create a type for all of the columns and we'll give that type a very specific type mark. And then we'll associate the connection that's placed on those columns with that type mark. So we know that this connection goes to these columns. And then, we follow that up with the project documentation. So we'll create a drafting view and tag all of those elements to make sure that we have every element where it's supposed to be associated with the proper column. And then we'll just keep purging the model so that we don't have elements that we're not using in the project, so we don't get confused. So Absolutely. Anything that's not actually placed in the project, we just get rid of on a weekly basis to make sure that we don't have any rogue connections. But yeah, it's actually quite an intensive process. The modeling aspect it's only really half of the work. The other half of the work is just managing the project. And
that's true, especially when it's that level of detail. And in a second, we will dive deeper into a cloud collaboration of that and the lessons learned for the VDC. But before that, I just want to make a few points on that as well. So when you said, for example, connection, I presume in Revit, you don't use any plugins for like a kind of still connections because the level of detail you're looking for, the information that you're looking for, I believe you need to do a manual process of parametric families where you can use with the help of Dynamo or kind of maybe some kind of sorting, so it can quickly insert it in multiple locations and multiple distances, or in certain cases, most probably you are adding getting things manually. And then there's a visual QA, and as you said, documentational QA aspect. Documentational QA schedules documentation to the information. Most probably a lot of sections. I believe you're cutting a lot of things to understand if you're doing things right, and out of schedules already telling things are right or wrong. Most of the time when you visually just see it, you see, oh, this number is weird, it shouldn't be like that, or it's going beyond what we are expecting. But this is a power of Revit. Revit is very powerful in that aspect, and I think you're doing a right decision that you're using Revit, because if you use any other BIM authoring tool, I'm not sure if you can manage that level of efficiency for fabrication from the aspect. Maybe there are beneficials, like Tekla structure is very good for structural aspect, for steel connections, but getting the family thing and getting those family thing documentation, very niche specific reasons, I think the Revit is best. It gives you the wider flexibility. What do you think on that aspect?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the reasons I just love Revit is because, if you're willing to take the time to learn how to use some of the deeper functionality, you can really do anything you want. Whereas some of these other software, like Tekla you mentioned, and the timber industry, the mass timber industry actually has several specific mass timber softwares that you can use. It just lacks the functionality. It's really easy when you're doing connections that are predetermined, I guess, like pre-engineered hardware, or ho-hum connections that everybody has always used for many, many years. But when you're working on a project where you need a unique condition or connection, then Revit, it's really hard to beat Revit, because you can create anything. And then, yeah, like what you said, the data management is just phenomenal, the way that you can manage the data. We use a lot of global parameters in the project. So if you don't know,
and shared parameters.
Yeah, we use a lot of global and shared parameters. So we'll make sure that the parameters that we're creating within our family are shared parameters or global parameters. So we'll actually put kind of the high level information of a project as global parameters, and then we'll link all of those within the individual families. That's another really important QA.
It's a very, very important part.